and starting the live stream.
Great. And we're recording?
It's loading right now.
Okay, great.
There'll be a 10-second kind of delay.
Yeah, that's what I remember.
And we're
And
live.
we're recording?
We're live.
It's loading right now. There you go. Thanks. All right, welcome folks to Puget Sound Energy public webinar this evening. I am Annie Kilbrick-Smith. I'm going to be facilitating and we are going to get started in just a few minutes. So please sit tight and feel free to get comfortable. We'll be right with you. All right. Well, welcome everyone. Hello, and thanks for joining us tonight. My name is Annie Kilbrick-Smith. I'm with Triangle Associates, and I'm going to be your facilitator for this webinar hosted by Puget Sound Energy. So whether you're here to learn or ask questions or just stay informed, we are really glad that you made time out of your evening to be with us. I know there's lots of things you could be doing in the sun with your families, etc. So appreciate you taking time out of your day to do this. Today's session is really part of a broader effort to plan for a clean energy future, and your participation really helps Puget Sound Energy help shape that. And you're going to be hearing us say Puget Sound Energy, or PSE, a lot. The acronym gets used a lot amongst us as the facilitators and with Puget Sound Energy colleagues as well. So you'll just wanting you to get used to that. We'll also try to make sure we're not using a whole lot of acronyms throughout, just for folks that are new to this content. Okay, next slide. So before we dive in, just a quick tech check. You'll see your Zoom controls either at the bottom or top of your screen, depending on your device. That's where you can find closed captions in multiple languages and send a question through the Q&A tool. So the question and answer tool is going to be kind of your main place if you want to ask questions, or you can react with emojis. We'll be using that Q&A box throughout the session, so feel free to drop any questions you have in there as we go. And as a reminder, this is a webinar format, so while you won't see other attendees, our panelists will be responding to your questions when possible, and any questions that can't be answered tonight will go ahead and be included in the follow-up webinar recap. Okay, next slide. So a few quick notes to have us have a smooth session. Please just keep your questions focused on today's topic, energy planning, so we can stay on track. PSE is going to do their best to answer as many questions as they can live. And like I said, if they can't answer them, they'll go ahead and put that in the follow-up recap. If you think of something after tonight's session, you're always welcome to reach out using the feedback form or by emailing PSE at the email listed on the screen. And Emily's going to put those two items in the chat for y'all tonight. And we want to just thank you in advance for helping us keep things constructive and focused. We really value your participation tonight. All right, next slide. So safety moment tonight is an important one, and we've got several hyperlinks for you all in case you would like to use these resources, or you can click on the presentation online and get these hyperlinks as well. But before we jump into energy planning content, we wanted to talk about wildfire season, which is approaching, and we want to make sure your household is prepared. So first, building an emergency kit and making a plan with your family is really important. We want you to keep PSE's account info up to date in case of outages. And if you rely on electricity for medical devices, please be sure to apply for life support status on your PSE account. And for an easy next step, we'd love for you to get your free wildfire ready plan from the Washington Department of Natural Resources. It's quick and really helpful. And so we'll go ahead and drop those links in the chat for you tonight. All right, next slide. So for tonight's team, you're going to be hearing from Brian Tyson, Manager of Clean Energy Planning and Implementation at PSE, and Ray Outlaw is also here, Manager of Communications Initiatives at PSE. I'm going to be guiding us through the presentation and the conversation and the question and answer. And so thanks to Brian and Ray for being here tonight and walking us through what PSE is doing and what it means for customers and communities all like yours. Okay, next slide. So here's what we're going to be covering over the next hour. We'll start with a refresher on how we got to this point in the planning process. Then we're going to walk through how electricity is generated today, what PSE is also forecasting for future energy needs, and how all of this ties into the 2027 integrated system plan. We're going to save time throughout the meeting and at the end for questions and wrap up. If you're just listening tonight while also eating or doing something else, please feel free to get comfy and listen how you're most comfortable. We're just glad to have you here. All right, next slide. Okay, so we'll go ahead and move into the introduction with Brian Tyson. Just want to let you know you can feel free to ask questions in the Q&A pod or put them in the chat. Q&A pod will be a little easier and streamlined for us to see them. We'll be answering lots of those live as we go through them. If you are putting information into the chat, I just want to remind you all in the to box to drop it down and select everyone. So everyone on the webinar can see it. It's just a function of Zoom that it defaults to certain things for certain people. So please go ahead and select everyone to make sure that everyone gets to see what you're entering into the chat. And with that, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Brian to give us a quick refresher on how we got here tonight. Brian, over to you.
All right. Thank you, Annie. And thanks everyone for being here. Like Annie said, I know it's a beautiful weather out there, and so really appreciate everyone logging in onto this webinar. For those who've been here before, we've had a number of conversations in the past, and so I want to just start with a bit of a refresher. But ultimately, what we're hoping is that when you all walk away, you have a really good sense of our preferences for our large-scale energy resources that we're using in our ISP, and that we have a pretty good sense about what you all are thinking and what your preferences are for this clean energy transition as well. We're going to focus on large scale, utility scale resources today. I'll touch a little bit on the customer side as well, and then we'll come back later on in October to touch on that. But if we can go to the next slide. So as Annie mentioned, I'm going to start with a bit of a refresher. And when we first met in November, we were really thinking about the initial development, the initial stages of building this ISP, this integrated system plan that comes in and combines our electric and our gas planning processes together into one holistic plan. So we took time back in November to really talk through that and how really groundbreaking that was, because we're the first of its kind to really take on this large endeavor, but really just set the stage for some of the other conversations that we've had since then. And then back in March, we introduced some of the scenarios for our planning process. You all may remember the illustration we had about back to school shopping and what do you pick and what do you put in your shopping cart depending on the weather. We had that conversation back then, again, because that's part of how we build towards that final integrated system plan for in a couple years there. Now, today in July, we really want to focus on what is it that could actually power that clean energy future. And so we want to talk about the types of resources, whether they be existing, whether they be emerging resources, emerging technologies rather, that may come about later on in the years. We really want to talk about what we're considering, and then especially hear from you all on what is top of mind for you. What preferences do you have as it relates to these clean energy resources? As I mentioned, when we get to October, we'll dive deeper into the customer side. Today is really focused on those larger resources, but we'll dive deeper into the customer side in October, and then we'll have additional topics to come in the future as we build and develop this particular plan. Next slide, please. So we first want to start with today's energy generation. So we think it's important that we sort of start with where are we at today? What does our mix look like today? What are we seeing today as we start to talk about what could we do in the future? So if we go to the next slide, we want to start with sort of three buckets. And there's a reason we're putting in these buckets, and maybe that'll hopefully help as we talk later on through this presentation. But we think about what are the resources that we can use for baseload? What are the resources we can use during those peaking events? And what are those intermittent resources that are out there? And as you can see, there's definitions for each of those, examples for each of those. So baseload, we're really thinking about what is the generation that is always available, meaning we can always count on it. It's pretty sustainable throughout a long period of time. And we think of things like some of our hydro, a lot of the nuclear, some of the fossil fuel generation that we have out there. Those are the units that are continuously running on and on and on. The other types of resources may be peaking resources. So you think about even a hot day like today or yesterday where temperatures are really hot, so the demand on the system is really high. Or for us, it would be during the winter times when it's a really cold event and heaters are up and things like that. And so that would be an opportunity where we really rely on some of those peaking resources. Those are the resources that we can quickly turn on and off in the instances that we have those what we call peak events, just those events of high demand. And then our final bucket are intermittent resources. Now, these are the resources that, depending on the weather, depending on certain conditions, they may be running. And they really complement what our baseload is, what our peaking resources are. So we think about our wind and solar, and even some of our hydro resources that we have as well. But it's the combination, it's the totality of these that we have to consider as we get into this integrated system plan. Now, I hope you all will just sort of take a mental picture of these three buckets because we're going to come back and revisit those later on in the slides. But this really just sets a baseline or foundation for how we're going to walk through the presentation here. If we can go to the next slide, please. The mix is also really important because we want to understand where we at today, and this mix actually reflects where we were back in 2023. But generally, this is where our energy mix, our electricity energy mix sits today, where we're almost at about half using wind, hydro, some of those intermittent resources, or some of those renewable non-emitting resources, and the rest is a lot of the fossil fuel resources as well. Now, one of the things that I'll touch on later, but I'll say now is that because of CETA, we will have to transition out of coal at the end of this year. So one of the things we have to think about is not only what are we going to do as we transition out of coal this year, but what is our energy mix going to look like as we transition to 2045, where we have less coal and less of the natural gas or the fossil fuel resources. Okay, we can go to the next slide, and I think this might be opportunity to take a few questions. Okay, any questions from anyone?
Yeah, so thanks, Brian, for that intro and some good starting information. Folks, I haven't seen any questions pop in yet, but let me pull it back up again and see if there's any questions from anyone. Please feel free to pop them into the Q&A or into the chat, whatever is easiest. We'll give you a few moments. Okay. All right. Well, not okay. We've gotten one. So we'll see if we want to answer that one live. Okay, great. So from Devin Caleb says, where does solar and battery storage fit in?
Oh, good question. Thank you for that question. I think it was a Devin.
Devin, yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Devin. So for the solar, and I assume you're referring to the mix, the screen that had the mix, if we can go back to that. So the solar is a smaller sliver, and that's why you don't see it. I think it's in that other bucket that you saw there. So right now, we just have a small amount of solar in our energy mix today. We anticipate that could increase in the future. But again, this is the large scale solar And there's also customers who have rooftop solar who are participating in net metering and things like that. Those are, again, a smaller sliver of our full energy profile. So it is there. Storage is a little bit different here because if you remember when I talked about storage, I was thinking about those peaking resources. And so storage is not a generating resource. It is just a resource that we can store some sort of energy, whether it come from wind and solar, or maybe it comes from natural gas, but we don't consider it a generating resource, and so it is not part of the mix that you saw there. But it doesn't mean that we will not consider those in the future moving forward. So Devin, hopefully that answers your question.
Thanks, Brian. And then there was a question in the chat from Janet. Where is coal coming from?
Oh, thanks for that question, Janet. Currently, there's two primary sources where coal comes from. One is from Montana through our coal strip facility. The other is from the coal plant down in Centralia.
Okay, great. Any other questions?
Brian,
Yeah.
Andy, there's
Yeah.
one more. This is Ray, sorry.
Yeah, no thanks.
There's one more in the chat. If we need to get rid of coal and natural gas, what will make up the replacement of coal and natural gas from Mark? And Brian, I think we're going to tackle that in just a few slides.
Yeah, we will. Thanks for that, Mark. That's exactly where we want to go, Mark. We're not sure yet, but that is a part of this process, right? To really understand and analyze all the options out there as we try to figure out, okay, if these resources are going away, moving away, what are we going to do to really fill in that hole? So, Mark, you're spot on. That's exactly the direction, the answer we want to try to help tease out today.
Okay, well, it doesn't look like there's other questions. So Brian, let's dive into the next piece.
Okay. So now I want to talk a bit about some of the challenges that are going to impact what that mix of resources can be. Mark, back to your question. What are the challenges that are going to impact how we replace the coal, natural gas, and move forward to 100% clean, non-emitting resources? I first want to start with demand. So if we go to the next slide, and you all have seen this before, I think this is a similar chart we had in our last public webinar, which really just emphasizes that when we do our forecast, and we do a yearly forecast in terms of our load and what we see in terms of growth, we see that it is increasing over the next 20-year period. And there's a number of reasons why it is increasing. It could be because of more electric vehicles are being adopted into the service territory. Could be because of population growth in different areas, but also the demand for commercial and residential cooling is also increasing as well as you see because of the warm weather we have out today. And so a lot of these different items, and there are others as well, really add to the increase in load over time. So let's keep that in mind, and then let's move to the next slide. So that's one challenge. And let's go back to sort of the question that Mark raised and what we discussed earlier, which is if you look at our mix of the wind, the hydro, the other bucket, the coal and natural gas, and you think about, well, in 2045, we need to retire coal by the end of 2025. So that piece of the pie sort of gets shaded. So we've got to replace that. You think about, well, we need to be 100%. So all of our natural gas we'll have to retire or use another source. So we have to shade that little area. Then you think about, well, I just told you all there's a lot more demand coming. And so we need something to fill in that new piece of demand. And so you see that shaded area there. And then, of course, we know that our hydro can be variable just depending on what the weather is like, just like our wind and solar can also be variable as well. And so I point this out and I want to pause here because I wanted just to note that we basically have to sort of backfill some of that, all those fossil fuel areas, and also think about the resources that are going to help with that new slice of demand that's coming as well. So this is just one part of the sort of the challenges, the complexities that we have here. We can go to the next slide. Now, the other challenges are really far-reaching. You can see there's a number of challenges that we've listed here. One is transmission. Being able to bring resources from a distance to our load center is challenging at the moment, just in terms of permitting and getting things built and things like that. That will be a challenge. Uh, Keeping customers thinking about and being concerned about customers' costs is another really big challenge. We know that as we bring in some of these emerging technologies, we make some of these investments that it may reflect an increase in costs. And so we need to be mindful of when we bring in these new resources, how does it impact customers' costs? How does it impact your bills at the end of the day? Um, the other things we have to think about is, well, there may be some other impacts to customers as we make this transition as well. So we need to obviously continue to have these conversations with you and customers across our service territory, but we need to think about what are those issues that are top of mind for you? What are um, some of the things that you're thinking about that may impact you on a day-to-day basis, may just impact you um, as a customer? We also have to think about how do we support customers who want to electrify, who want to bring in some of those electric vehicles, who want to make changes to their homes or their businesses? Those are the things that we have to really keep top of mind as we think about this transition here. Okay, I'm going to stop there because I think we went through a big list of all the challenges and the needs here, and see if there's any questions.
Yeah, Brian, thank you so much. And just a reminder to folks, no need to wait to put questions in the Q&A pod. You can pop them in at any time. I see one that's in there now, so we'll go to that next, but just make sure, feel free to do that over the next 40 minutes that we have left together. So from Devin, again, since newer electric technologies such as heat cool pumps are actually more energy efficient, how much of the expected increase in demand is coming from other draws such as data centers and crypto processing?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Devin. This is one that comes up a lot, especially related to data centers. And I would say that we are monitoring, we are studying the impacts of an increase in data centers as it relates to our load forecast. So remember, we talked about that demand chart that you saw there. So as part of that, some of the increase we do see from data centers. And so we are mindful of what are those pieces, those building blocks, if you will, that really project the increase in demand over time. I don't have a specific number to let you know how much that is. I don't know if we may or may not have one offhand that we can provide, but that's something we could probably take back and look at for a specific number.
Thanks for that, Brian. And we have another question up from Ron Schur. How will the shift to clean energy affect the electricity costs for consumers in the next few years?
Yeah, thanks for that, Annie and Rancher on the Q&A as well. Um, that is exactly what we're trying to understand is what will the impact be? So one of the things that we recognize is that as we make this transition, it's not just buying new resources or building new resources, but also the investments that have to be made across our grid, across our distribution and transmission system as well. And so when you think about all those different pieces that have to come together, they may cause an increase in customers' bills and customers' rates. However, one of the things that we are keenly aware of is we need to provide some support for customers, especially if we believe bills are going to rise. And so we have a number of bill assistance and energy assistance programs that are there that are available for customers if we do see an increase in rates in our bills over time.
Thanks, Brian. Okay. We've got another question from Jonathan. How much actual power are we looking to replace in terms of GW gigawatts or kWh?
Yeah, thanks for that, Jonathan. I know we have an answer on a what's called a RPAG, our Resource Planning Advisory Group, on the actual number of power we're looking to replace. So I'm hoping the team, or maybe we can go back and look for that actual number, because I think you're looking for an actual number, Jonathan. I think we can try to find that for you.
Brian, I'll find that number and we'll come
Okay.
back to this one in a bit.
Thanks, Ray.
Great. Thanks, Ray. Okay. Other questions? Okay. Got another one in the Q&A pod. So from Jonathan, how much oh, that was the same one. Okay, thank you. It was just put in two different places.
Yeah.
Jonathan for putting it in the chat and in the Q&A. We've got that. And then we've got another one in the chat. Okay, so I'll go back over there. It's from Mark. What is the loss over distance in power generation? How efficient is it to put solar and wind in Eastern Washington and bring it across the mountains? What are Eastern Washington's future needs?
Yeah, thanks for that, Mark. When we do our studies, we consider line losses as part of the studies and understanding how we get energy from Eastern Washington or other states back to this area. One of the things I will say is that we're looking for areas where, and there's a slide later on that talks about sort of a geographical map of where we're placing things, but we're really thinking about, okay, where do we have um, really effective areas of solar, meaning where can we get a really large swath of solar and bring that back home? Now, we consider losses, right? We have to understand those losses. And the reason I think about Eastern Washington and all these other states is because that's less of the case here in Western Washington. We're just able to get larger amounts of solar, if you will, across the region versus all here in Western Washington. But Mark, I think you raise a good point that it is going to require some losses. Um, Rather, physically, you do have losses coming from one side of the state to the other. And that's really part of the analysis. That's really what we are trying to analyze and look at of, does it make sense to go across the state, or does it make sense to go to another part closer to our service territory? And so we really have to think about, where are we going to get really large amounts of solar, in this case, large amounts of solar to help meet our need and help serve our load.
Thanks, Brian.
Uh,
And then was just going to circle back on that question to Jonathan. Virginia went ahead and responded to that in the chat. So you'll see those numbers there.
oh, thank you, Virginia.
Yeah. Okay, there's another question in the Q&A pod from Tom. So utilities in some states, Texas and California, are using batteries less as peaking resources, but more for balancing daily challenges in solar and wind because battery costs are falling. Is PSE planning to use batteries this way?
Thanks for that, Tom. I think this is an area that we'll probably have to investigate and go look at. For us, batteries are pretty new in terms of operationalizing them, in terms of using them on our system. And so I think right now we're really trying to study them as they're in our system and understand what's the best way to use batteries. I see your point, though, that batteries have a lot of different use cases, especially they're new to us. And so we're really trying to explore and understand what's going to be the best case for us. When we do our studies, I will say the focus is on them being a peaking resource. And then once they're on our system, then we'll have to determine and really figure out what are other use cases rather for those storage.
Thanks for that. Okay, and thanks everyone for your questions so far. It's great to see those. Feel free to keep them coming. But right now we're gonna pause since I don't see any in the chat, and we're gonna try something called a bit of a waterfall round. So it's a simple way to gather some input quickly and all at once. And Emily, I'm gonna have you put the first waterfall question in the chat if you don't mind. And Jonathan, oh, sorry, Jonathan, you didn't see where a question was answered. I'll recopy it. Oh, Virginia, sorry, you had it dropped down to host and panelists. I'll go ahead and copy it to everyone. So it says over 2,700 megawatts of thermal by 2045, coal and gas to replace. Thank you, Jonathan, for catching that for us. Okay, so Emily is going to put a question in the chat to start this waterfall around, and I don't want you to press send yet. I do want you to start thinking about your answer though, and I'll explain what we're going to do. So the first question is, what matters most to you about clean energy planning? And so again, just you can start typing your answer, but don't press send yet. So here's how we're going to do this is we're going to do a couple rounds of this. So once I say go, I'll have you all press hit send, and we'll get to see all of your answers at once in a waterfall, which will be kind of nice to just see them all flowing in at once. And we'd like to do this with a couple questions if you all find this engaging. And so please feel free to keep your answers brief or expand a little if you're feeling inspired. But as I mentioned, first question is in the chat. What matters most to you about clean energy planning? And I'll give you about 10 seconds to start typing into your chat box, and remember to just press the 2 drop down to everyone. We're excited to hear what matters most to you about clean energy planning. Okay, 1, 2, 3, go ahead and press send. Great, seeing lots of responses come in. GHG reduction, that the terms and conditions are clear, cost effective for consumers, affordability, looking at making structures more efficient before looking at other energy resources, decarbonization, cost effectiveness, getting off fossil fuels ASAP. Does the job. Yeah, great, everyone. Okay, well, that was great to hear all of those. So I think what I'll do is we'll go ahead and do, and I see more coming in. We'll go ahead and do a second question because it's really nice to get this type of qualitative information from folks and hear what's most important to you. Our second, and I see affordability, climate stability, resilience, great. Our second question's from Emily in there. It's what trade-offs do you think PSE needs to consider when deciding which large-scale energy resources to use? So go ahead and start typing, but you don't need to press send yet. I'll read it again. What trade-offs do you think we need to consider when deciding which large-scale energy resources to use? And when I say we, I mean Puget Sound Energy. Okay, I'll give you couple more moments. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Go ahead and press send. We'd love to see those responses come in. Great. Financial and climate impacts. Looking at nuclear. Another one for GHG reduction. Energy that doesn't deplete our natural resources. Variability and dependability. Time of day pricing. Local options. Great. And I think someone put it in the Q&A pod, microgrids versus large scale. Equity, cost and actual science, backed down side. Okay. Well, since this is very good to see, and I think good information for Puget Sound Energy to get, we'll do one more question. So Emily will put one more in there, and I'll read it a couple times. What would help your community feel supported or included if a large energy project like wind, solar, or storage were proposed nearby? And go ahead and start typing, but don't press send yet. What would help your community feel supported or included if a large energy project like wind, solar, or storage were proposed nearby? Go ahead and start typing. I'll give you a few moments. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Go ahead and press send. We'll see those responses come in. Early notice with detailed information. Understandable. Step them through the safety. Probably won't happen on the west side of the mountains. Town halls to discuss. Environmental impacts for all. Are you exploring nuclear energy to produce electricity? Public comment looks important to folks. Couple messages about that, including public rep on review team. Okay. Great. Well, feel free to enter anything else that you think would be important to you and help you feel supported. But that's great to see those responses. Thank you, everyone, for giving us a little bit of qualitative information and helping us liven up things a bit. Brian, it does look like there is a outstanding question in the chat. So why don't we go to that before we keep moving along in the agenda, if that's okay, from Devin. Can PSE help building owners to install solar or ground source heat pumps locally as an option to transmission build out?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Devin. I believe that we may have a couple of resources we can point you to in terms of um, helping with building or installing solar, and probably on the heat pumps as well. But I don't know if Ray, if there are any resources we can provide in the chat. We may have that, Devin.
Brian, I think the question is more about could PSE install solar or support heat pumps as an alternative to building out transmission? So could rooftop solar and heat pumps reduce the
Uh,
need for additional generation?
My apology. Thank you for that, Ray. I was
Yeah.
not reading that correctly. Yeah, so I would say, and this is probably similar to another question, that we're going to look at all the options that are available out there. And so, although some of these, whether it's building solar or ground source heat pumps, may really help us in minimizing the amount that we need to build out, we still have a large gap to close and a really far distance to go. But I think those are options that will consider in our planning process.
Brian, I'll jump in. There was one more in the chat that's kind of related. What are the energy efficiency estimates for the region? I know we don't have that specific number, but should we make old new structures more efficient rather than new power generation? And I think the answer is similar,
Hmm.
that yes, we should make things more efficient, but that's not going to solve all of our generation needs.
Yep, exactly, Ray. Thanks for that. And
Mhm.
thanks, I think it was Mark that had the question. Thanks, Mark, for that.
Okay, well, that gets us pretty caught up with questions. A couple last items that came through about items that would make community feel supported for large scale energy that might be nearby was just local tax benefits, clear scorecard of pros and cons, more, as much detailed information as possible. So thank you so much for those responses, waterfalling in. And did we already respond to this one from Jonathan? Do we have cost?
I think that one's new.
Yeah,
It
okay.
is new,
That's
yes.
what I thought. Okay.
Yeah, and I will say, Jonathan, and I think we might touch on it later, but Um, yes, as part of this process, we do outline and understand the costs of the various resources, whether it be these large-scale solar, wind, emerging technologies, or on the demand side as well. So we use all that information as part of the full model um, to understand the costs for each of the resources.
Thanks, Brian. And then was there one more, Ray, that you wanted to bring up and respond to? Or am I missing something? Just want to make
I
sure.
think you got it for now,
Okay.
Annie. Let's go ahead and we'll jump back to any that we missed. I'm going through the chat now because with the
Okay.
waterfall, there's a few that might have got buried.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so Brian, I think we're going to keep going. So you can go to the next slide.
Okay.
We're right on time. We've got about 25 minutes left. So Brian's going to take us through developing an integrated system plan. And of course, keep the questions coming. We'll answer as many as we have time for. Thanks, everyone.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, Annie. Thank you all for participating in the waterfall. It's good to see all the items come in and all the feedback come in. That's really, really helpful for us. I'm going to continue us through. We talked a lot about all the challenges and the hurdles and things like that, but I want to get back to the plan. So try to come back full circle. Okay, you talked about all these challenges. What does that mean for the plan? What does that mean for energy resources specifically? So if you go to the next slide, if you recall, when we met earlier this year and late last year, we really focused on scenarios and really trying to think about, in order to build this integrated system plan, we have to think about what a clean energy future could look like. And so we've developed sort of these four different scenarios that help us look at, well, we could have a future that looks like this, or we could have a future that looks like that. But really, it's thinking about what are the various levels of investments that need to be made to meet either various levels of electric load growth or gas load reduction. So we have to think about if we have more electrification, that's going to require more investments in the system. So we have to study that scenario, right? And then maybe we have a little less on the load growth, on the electric load growth, a little less in investments. What does that do to our mix? So we're really trying to model and test various scenarios. Again, trying to understand what is that future going to look like. So if you go to the next slide, now, as we model and analyze each of these scenarios, we have to be cognizant of what is the generation that's going to make up the needs there. So what are the types of generation that are going to actually help us in those various scenarios? And I go back to, if you all remember, the buckets that we talked about earlier, representing the base load, the peaking, and the intermittent resources. And so here we're actually listing those energy resources that we're considering and how we see them helping to support in the integrated system plan overall. So for each of these, you see in the base load, again, those were the resources that had the steady stream always going. And you see that we have retirement for coal. We have natural gas that there may be some clean fuel conversion by the time we get to 2045. And then you see some emerging technologies like the enhanced geothermal and some of the nuclear. I think someone had a question about nuclear in the chat here as well. And so these are the things that we're thinking about that we could add potentially as some of the baseload resources as we go through the modeling here. The next bucket of resources is our peaking resources. And I believe maybe it was Devin, but someone asked earlier about sort of the storage side and using peaking resource on the storage side. But here again, we see some of the natural gas conversion that could be used, some renewable fuels as an emerging technology. We mentioned storage and whatever may happen with storage, whether it be short duration, medium, or long duration storage, or even hydrogen as well. These are, again, emerging technologies that they may not be quite available right now in terms of the hydrogen, but we will try to analyze and model what that may look like again once we get to 2045. And then the final bucket was just intermittent resources. This one stayed the same. There weren't any others to add here, but it's again the solar, the wind, and the hydroelectric as well. Okay, if we can go to the next slide. Someone had a question on sort of the losses that happen when you have energy east of the mountains and things of that sort. This slide, as I mentioned, really just depicts we try to cover the full gamut of resources in the region, meaning we want to understand what does it mean to get battery storage from Montana versus storage from Oregon or a hybrid system from Nevada. We want to understand what does it mean to get a wind from Wyoming versus hydro in BC and things like that. So it's really about understanding the different options that are in the region, and we sort of bucket in different areas based on what we think may be available in that future. Again, it's about planning that future process, right? And trying to understand what could be available in that future setting. And so this really hopefully gives you a picture of really a number of the areas, the options and opportunities, if you will, in this planning exercise that we're going to consider. Okay, next slide, please. All right. We're not going to touch on this as much because I think we're going to get to this in our next public webinar later on in October. But this is just to let you all know, like we are still considering a number of the customer-sided programs. And so we talked a lot about energy efficiency, and it sounds like many of you are familiar with the energy efficiency, some of the rooftop solar, but we also have our demand response, our residential or commercial storage. We have other sort of voluntary green programs, and then vehicle to everything. Vehicle to everything is one that's been emerging, and I think we've had a number of customers, a number of participants in the webinars really talk about where does vehicle to everything fit? How are we considering that? We'll talk more about that in October, but it's definitely something that we are cognizant of and aware of and expecting to grow over the next 10 years. Okay, so we can go to the next slide. So let's sort of bring all of this together, as I think this is gonna wrap us up here. But the ultimate question is, how will we determine the right mix of those utility scale and customer resources to get that final plan? And it's sort of at a high level, sort of these 6 steps that we think about. The first is really identifying the requirements. So we had to think about, what is it that we are required to do? What is it that we have to do moving towards 2045? And we talked a little bit about that in a previous webinar. The next step, step 2, is to really develop those scenarios. So going back to the shopping cart, the rather back to school shopping based on different weather conditions. Again, we want to try to model various scenarios, various possible futures, to really understand what the mix of resources could look like. This third step is kind of where we're at talking about today, which is, how do we develop and finalize those inputs, those modeling inputs and assumptions, whether it's which emerging technology should we include, which types of resources, where should we locate them, what are the costs? I know we talked about costs earlier. What are the costs of those resources? All those pieces are what we're trying to pull together in this step. And then once we pull those together in step 4, then we do the actual modeling. We actually put everything in the computer, let it run, and then it helps us to really identify some of those potential plans. Now, in step 5, it's not just a one-time run. We really want to be iterative as new information may become available, or we really start to look in the details, if you will, of what the models show. We'll do that on an iterative basis, and then in our final step, we'll come together and bring a final portfolio, if you will, and develop that final system plan. Now, we'll say those last 2 steps, we're still working through, still determining how we're going to tease that out, how we're going to pull those together. But this hopefully gives you all some insight of, how do we go with where we were in November to where are we going in the future? And again, in that step 3, that middle stage, is kind of where we're at, thinking about, how do we use the information you all provided? How do we use some of those? How can we consider those large energy resources as we move forward here? And I'll pause for questions, I think.
Okay. Yeah, I've got a couple for you, Brian. Excuse me if you already answered this. From Jonathan, do we have cost projections under different energy sources?
We do. Yeah, that's part of, yes, we do, Jonathan. That's part of our process of gathering the input assumptions. We have a team that looks at costs for all of the variety of resources.
Brian, I want to jump into,
Hmm.
we actually just had a conversation with our resource planning advisory group on this a month or so ago. Jonathan, I'm going to put a link to that YouTube in the chat. You're more than welcome to watch that. I'll also put a link to the meeting materials where you can get quite a bit more detail if you're interested.
Thanks, Ray.
And Annie, there's one more in the chat that I want to get to really quick. Does
Yeah.
modeling include the gas system? And the answer to that is yes, absolutely.
Okay. Thanks, Ray. Okay. And then there's a couple more. So I'll switch over to the Q&A pod. I see also, Jonathan, you have another question in the chat. I'll get to that too. One from Court. The electrification transition conceptually suggests the need for increased demand and infrastructure growth. A large part of the necessity for infrastructure growth can be offset by energy use regulation and utility incentives. When will you talk about such mitigating options to slow the need for infrastructure growth?
Well, thanks for that question, Court. I want to be sure I understand the question here. Um, Okay, I want to say, Court, that this really dives into some of the customer programs when we think about electrification. And I know we'll talk more about some of those customer programs in our October meeting as well. Um, so hopefully that helps, Court. And Ray, anything else
Yeah,
to add there?
yeah, I've had a second to think about this one, Brian. Um, I think the question is really how and to what degree can PSE drive um, customer side changes so that PSE doesn't have to build as much generation or transmission capacity. So it links to a question earlier. I think the answer is we can do that to a degree. We can offer some incentives. Those need to be approved by the commission, right? We
Mhm.
don't control policy or regulation, so we don't have a lot we can do in that space. But our modeling and our analysis is looking at sort of all of these options and what differences those can make. And conservation, excuse me, we look at conservation in multiple ways, right, to see sort of what's the maximum conservation or customer resources that we could use to offset the need for utility scale resources elsewhere.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Ray.
Okay, there's another question in the chat from Jonathan. Have you run any super preliminary stuff on space-based solar as we are looking 20 years into the future?
Oh, thanks for that, Jonathan. I am not aware of any. To my knowledge, I don't know that we have looked at space-based solar. Be interested to hear more, but not to my knowledge.
Okay,
Oh,
thanks, Brian. Sounds cool. Okay. One from Devin here. Is geothermal in the mix?
uh, yes, geothermal is one of our emerging technologies. Um, I don't know that it is at the size at a really large scale right now, but yes, that is part of, I believe that is part of our mix we're looking at.
Okay. All right. And then I'm going back over to the Q&A. Okay, so
Hey,
we've got another,
Andy,
go ahead, Ray.
Oh, go
sorry,
ahead.
just want to interrupt. Brian, I'm thinking about that. Is geothermal in the mix question? And we had two mix slides, right? One today and one future.
Mm-hmm.
And I think so today, no, it's not part of our
Right.
generating resources. In the future, it might be. It's still an emerging technology. It's developing in other places, and we're monitoring that closely to see if it is a fit for PSE.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. Thanks, Ray.
And just a reminder, I think I'm not seeing everyone's questions. Maybe some folks are accidentally direct messaging people. I'm getting them eventually, but just as a reminder, when you go to the chat box, well, first of all, if you want to put your question in the Q&A pod, that's much easier. But if you do put it in the chat box, when you go to the to drop down, please select everyone. I know it's confusing because you can select individuals, and I think that might be what might be happening. So please just go ahead and do that. And if you could put it in the Q&A pod instead, even better. I know some people are joining from their phone though, and it can be difficult. So let me just go back to the question that I received. Okay, so this is from Ronshire again. What does the timeline look like for planning to implementation phase for shifting to cleaner energy?
Okay, thanks for that question, Ron. Sure. I think you're asking when are we going to actually get to implementation phase and start to sort of shift? And I would say that is ongoing. Once CETA passed, we've been sort of at the forefront of transitioning our energy portfolio to a cleaner portfolio. So we've brought in a number of wind, solar, um, resources into our portfolio, and we will continue to do that as we move towards 2045 as well. So that is an ongoing piece in trying to implement and bring in those resources, as well as expand the customer programs we have as well.
Okay, Brian, we've got another question from Devin in the Q&A pod. What do you mean by clean fuel conversion in relation to natural gas? The way I understand it, there are big limitations. The amount of RNG generation can't possibly replace more than a fraction of even current usage. Plus, it's still mostly methane and burns to CO2.
Yeah, thanks for that, Devin. And Devin, this is one where we are exploring what could be sort of possible, whether it be other renewable natural gas or renewable fuels, if you will, or hydrogen. And so we're really in that phase of just seeing this as an emerging technology and seeing that this could possibly help and meet some of the need we have right now. But as you mentioned, it is really at a fraction of what we would need to fully replace. And so I would put that in the bucket of that's something we're still studying, but aware of as we move towards that 2045 goal.
All right, next question, Brian. I know you're getting hit quickly here,
Oh,
so
no, you're fine. These are great.
okay, great. So from Ron, sure, what does the timeline look like for planning to implement? Oh, did we already
Yeah, that one we
do that one in the chat
did.
too? Okay,
Yep.
so we'll answer that one. Sorry, need to mark that as being answered. Okay, and then let me just pause. I think there might have been a couple that got direct messaged to folks. Ray or others, were there some that you wanted to answer live here that we've missed?
Annie, I'm trying to check on a couple of answers here.
Yeah.
The hydrogen question I'm working on.
Okay. That sounds good.
And Brian, how about this one? What part do you envision battery storage to play in the future energy needs? I think we could probably take that one.
Yeah, and I think thanks, Irene. I think oh, thanks, Wendy, for that. That one, we sort of talked about that earlier, which is we model a lot of storage really thinking about those peak instances. So whenever demand is high, we need to get some amount of energy used in the future. But uh, I would say that's what we're doing sort of right now in the planning aspect. But there could be other ways, other means that maybe we just don't know yet, or we'll see later on as we continue to iterate and use these for the future. Um, so a lot of it is really based on storing some of that energy. So you have a lot of solar and you don't have a lot of need, right? You just use that, you just store it there, and then you use it later on when demand is higher. That's really sort of a core aspect right now.
Thanks, Brian. I'll take this hydrogen one. The short answer is we don't know. It really is to be determined. As we're looking at it as an emerging resource, and we're going to evaluate it as an emerging resource, but it is uncertain at this time. And sorry, the question was how far away is hydrogen from becoming a reliable energy source?
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for that, Ray. Okay. I know there's potentially a couple more questions. So I'll just wait on Ray and others to just let us know what those ones are. Okay, great. We've got one in the queue again. So from Mark, could we be looking at not being able to address our energy needs due to federal funding cuts?
Yeah, thanks for that, Mark. I would say that the cuts are going to may impact sort of the costs of resources. So we'll see the impact of the costs, but we don't anticipate it affecting reliability. We will continue to serve customers. So we just have to be cognizant of the impacts to costs.
Thanks, Brian. Okay. And then another question from Devin. Where does nuclear fit in the mix?
Oh, thanks for that, Devin. I don't know if someone has a quick note on this, but nuclear we see as part of either the base load, firm capacity. And so we have a team that's continuing to look at any of the emerging technology, whether it be the small modular reactors or things like that. So it could be a part of the mix, and one of our buckets would be the base load area.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for those questions. Those were great. We're at 6:28, so I think I'm going to go ahead and stop taking questions, but and start moving into a question that we have for all of you. So thank you, Brian, for letting us put you in the hot seat with all those questions coming at you quickly. But we have a question for folks to respond to. PSE would love to have your feedback. So Emily, if you want to get ready to put that link in, or if you want to put that link in the chat for everyone, there is a link in the chat now. And then Emily, if you want to be ready to just share your screen whenever you get a chance. Now that we've gotten through a lot of the Q&A and a lot of the chat, we wanted to just get a take on what matters most to you. So we're going to use a quick ranking poll to hear from everyone, which the link for that is right in the chat. It's a Microsoft form, so you'll see it pop up. And what you do is you just open it up. You'll see a question, and then there's going to be a list of 7 things. And what you do with your mouse is you can drag and rearrange them. So what is most important to you? And the most important goes at the top of the list. So drag the ones that you see as your most important items to the top, and the least important ones for yourself go to the bottom. And then once you're finished, you just have to scroll to the bottom where you see that blue submit button and press submit. And that way Puget Sound can see that information, Puget Sound Energy can see that information and get that perspective from you. There's no right or wrong answer. We're just looking for your honest perspective. Should just take a minute or two, and we'd love to share the results live. I think what I'll do is give you all a few minutes. Emily, we can finish the rest of the slides, and then before we end the meeting, we can show the live results so they can come in first. So please open that, and even if you don't have time right now to do it, please go ahead and open it in your browser so you can do it at a maybe tomorrow, but we will be closing that probably by end of day tomorrow. If you're having trouble with the link, just let us know by putting a note in the chat and we'll help you out. Okay, and so you can go to the next slide. Okay. So now that we're moving into wrap up, make sure to just, we've talked about a lot today, and of course the work doesn't stop here. So there's a bunch of ways you can stay engaged and connected and help shape PSE's clean energy plans moving forward. So you can join the email list to stay in the loop about future meetings and updates. You can visit the Integrated System Plan website to explore more about this process. You can participate in other future webinar meetings. There is another one next Tuesday with the same content, July 22nd from 12 to 1 over the lunch hour. Same people, same content, and maybe just a little bit different crowd since it's going to be over lunch. And would just want to thank you for, if that is something you can be there for, great. A reminder from today, if you attended today, you'll be entered into a raffle where there's going to be 3 winners selected for a $100 Visa gift card. So if you someone couldn't attend today and would like to be entered in that, and you want them to learn about this information, they can attend next Tuesday. All right, next slide. And then if you think of something later on or want to follow up, here's how you can contact Puget Sound Energy. So you can use their email, you can use their feedback form, and we'll drop those in the chat again for you all, or you can leave a voicemail at the number that you see on the screen, which for people that are listening, it's 425-818-2051. And before we fully wrap up, we will go ahead and see if Emily has some live results for us. So thanks to those that have completed the poll. Emily, do you mind? It's a little small for me. Do you mind sharing what it says?
Yeah, currently we have 12 responses. So rank number 1 is keeping energy reliable. Rank number 2 is cutting greenhouse emissions. Rank number 3 is keeping costs affordable. Rank number 4 is adding more clean energy sources. And let me see actually if I can zoom in so folks can see it instead of me reading it out.
Yeah, that's great. And you see the average time to complete this was 1 minute. So if you haven't done it already, we'd love to get your feedback. Thank you. Okay, great. I can see that.
Perfect.
Great to see those results coming in, and would love to see more. So feel free to click on that link one more time if you would like to in the Microsoft form. And with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Just note that we are going to have an end of meeting poll that will pop up when you exit the webinar. We would love to get your feedback. It's 3 questions just to let PSE know how they did tonight on the content, and want to just thank Brian, Ray, and other Puget Sound folks for being here tonight. Really appreciate your time this evening, and thank you all for your thoughtful, incredible questions. Really helpful to be engaged. You'll receive a follow-up email with materials and responses to any questions that we didn't get to tonight and a meeting recap. And then we hope to see you either at the second webinar next week or at a future webinar further down the road. Thanks, everyone.